Reshaping a Greater New Orleans, Seeking Safety and Justice, made possible by Baptist Community Ministries.
New Orleans is a long way from 2006, when a city rebounding from disaster decided to rethink criminal justice and rebuild a safer, more equitable system. So, are we safer?
One year you had 7,000 people in jail and your murder rate was through the roof. And then in a different year, you've got close to 1,000 people in jail and violent crime is low, then clearly there's a connection between those things.
The numbers show that the city is safer than it's ever been, which we shouldn't be satisfied with. It's the type of thing that we need to continue to do better. Just because we're 5th in the murder rate nationally rather than 1st is a success, but we're also still probably going to be in the top 5 this year. So we've got work to do, but all of the stuff that you would look at analytically to say, is the city trending in the right direction? All of those are sort of blinking green as yes.
It's not all about whether we're safer today or than we were yesterday. It's about trying to make it better. Let's try to do this thing so that every individual that we encounter in our criminal justice system, that we can either, if that person has to be incarcerated for the rest of his or her life because we know they cannot live in a society, in a civilized society, and obey the rules, then let's do that. But if we can help someone and make them better, then I think we have a responsibility and an obligation to try to do that.
We've decided as a community not to overreact to things like simple possession of marijuana and being able to handle those things through summons instead of arrest. We've made a dedicated effort to reduce the size of our local jail. We have a police force that is focusing more on serious crime, less on putting people in jail for break tags and out of parish traffic warrants. How do we make sure that the system is fair and that it is just? And I think that's where we still struggle. I think we still have disparate contact rates for people of color and poor people. We've had years where 100% of juvenile arrests were African American children. And it's causing some advocates to question whether our criminal legal system even believes black children are children.
Plus, a progress report on 2 consent decrees. The jail.
I'm not sure that the jail can safely operate today because of the staffing shortages. There has to be more attention, not just to recruiting more correctional staff, but recruiting them, training them, right? And giving them the tools that they need.
And the police.
Over time, we begin to see that you can be a constitutional police department and still affect violent crime, being really smart with strategies to identify problem persons, not necessarily problem areas, but very strategic in identifying problem persons through very sophisticated crime and data analysis, that we were able to, with laser focus, go after the problem individuals and build very, very good cases that are held up in court, creating a deterrent effect. And we were able to do that while transforming ourselves at the same time.
This is a new edition of Reshaping a Greater New Orleans, Seeking Safety and Justice.
I, Shaun Dwayne Ferguson Sr.
Do solemnly swear.
1 week after the transfer of leadership of the New Orleans Police Department from Superintendent Michael Harrison to Shaun Ferguson, the new chief participated in a public progress report on NOPD's compliance with the consent decree in place since 2013. U.S. District Judge Susie Morgan oversees the work of repairing NOPD. In January, she met at Loyola Law School instead of her courtroom to update citizens.
Prior to 2011, the New Orleans Police Department was a broken department. According to the Department of Justice, basic elements of effective policing, clear policies, training, accountability, and confidence of the citizenry had been absent for years. The DOJ found that the NOPD engaged in patterns of misconduct that violated the Constitution and federal law. I remind us of this history not to dwell on the past, but because it highlights how remarkable the department's transition has been. The New Orleans Police Department has made significant progress in every area of the consent decree. While this does not mean our job is finished, it is a noteworthy achievement. I believe that the entry of the consent decree order and the work the department has done has increased community satisfaction with the police department. Residents of and visitors to New Orleans no longer fear the police department, as many did prior to execution of the consent decree. Uses of excessive force, canine deployments, and other problematic events have been reduced substantially. As the community's perception of the NOPD has improved over the years, so has the perception of police officers themselves. I hear regularly from our officers that pride in wearing the uniform of the NOPD has been restored. But now NOPD is a leader in innovation. NOPD is the first department in the country to partner with the Innocence Project to teach investigative techniques to homicide detectives. NOPD has established an extremely effective use of force review board. NOPD has put into place a proactive critical incident video release policy. NOPD has developed an effective data management program called MAX and created what probably is the most open data sharing environment in the country. And these are all innovative programs developed and implemented by the NOPD. Until we know the reforms will be sustained, our work is incomplete. On that topic, I'm often asked when the department will have fully implemented the consent decree and federal judicial involvement will end. Well, paragraph 491 of the consent decree provides that the city and the United States may petition the court once the city has been in full and effective compliance with the consent decree for 2 years.
The police department continues to make significant progress in every area of the consent decree. That's very big news. There is not any area, even the areas that are harder and take longer, where progress is not being made.
Lead monitor Jonathan Arani and deputy monitor David Douglas gave a presentation highlighting major improvements in use of force, mental health crisis intervention training, sexual assault response and investigations, domestic violence response times, the secondary employment system, misconduct complaints, and academy and in-service training. They said the areas that need more work to start the 2-year clock to exit federal oversight are supervision, stops, searches and arrests, recruitment, performance evaluations and promotions, and community engagement.
We are committed, absolutely committed, to completing this circle. Not just complying with the consent decree in itself, but to sustain this throughout the process, beyond the process, and keep it going forward to continue to be this future, the leading, productive 21st century police department that we are. We will continue to move forward. We refuse, and we will not go backwards.
Jude Volek of the U.S. Department of Justice praised the major milestone in the case that began 8 years ago when DOJ opened its investigation.
In cases where a canine was used to apprehend a suspect, canines were biting those suspects more than 60% of the time, which is far higher than accepted law enforcement standards. That's a totally different situation now. In the last 2 years, there have been 0 canine bites. Notably, though, I want to point out that there have still been 116 deployments during that time, which shows that law enforcement tools are still being used. They're just being used properly in a way that protects both officers and members of the public. The use of force data really is important and astonishing, but we found that the reforms in this area really transcend that and are deeper than those data points alone. They really speak to the culture of the New Orleans Police Department. During our investigation, we found one incident as an example where an officer pulled somebody over for a DWI and that individual spat in his face. The officer reacted calmly, actually, but then was later chastised by his fellow officer for not at least punching the person who was being arrested. Compare that to what's happening at NOPD now, including the EPIC program, where you have the New Orleans Police Department serving as a national leader of peer intervention to make sure that officers help other officers comply with constitutional standards, which in turn saves their own professional lives.
Former New Orleans, now Baltimore Police Chief Harrison says the real difference in today's NOPD is accountability.
I think there's an entire culture change that the citizenry recognizes, that the country recognizes, in that we've become the model department to train other departments. And I would say now somewhere in the area of 25, maybe more other departments have come to visit us over the last 2 years to learn about all the things we're doing. I've been now recruited and sought after to be the chief of another department who may be experiencing similar issues that we used to and sometimes still are faced with. And so that's a proud moment from the department, because in 2012, the Department of Justice findings said we were the most troubled department in America.
Everything's improved.
Independent police monitor Susan Hudson runs the office that will step in to measure if NOPD sustains reforms when the consent decree ends.
I think they're definitely better. In 2018, we went without one shooting at a human being. Now, in 2019, there have been some shootings, but in each one of those shootings, the other person shot first. So, so there have been some, a little bit different than in the past. We had shootings where officers would shoot at people just running down the street. Nobody had shot at them. So, yeah, I would definitely say things are safer.
I would have to say that so far that the indicators are that is true. And where we see that is on officer-involved shootings, where we see that is on use of force complaints, where we see that is on dog bites, we see that in lawsuits.
Civil rights attorney Mary Howell has closely followed the consent decree and the surveys being done.
And they're not just surveying people on the street and in so-called safe neighborhoods, they're also doing surveys, and have been doing them for the past several years, of people in jail. And some of the questions that are being asked is, how were you handled by the police? Were you harmed in any way? Were you injured in any way? So there's an enormous amount of data that has been collected over the last 4 years, upon which you can conclude that people are in general safer in their interactions with the police. And I would also say that probably the police are also safer. And a lot of it goes back to how people are approached, how people are talked to, how they're addressed, the training that the police officers have, so that things that might have a number of years ago resulted in use of force, resulted in fights, resulted in injuries to either the police or the citizens involved, now are resolved without those things.
Of the challenges still to tackle, Howell says supervision is huge.
Is huge. It's just huge. None of this will work. None of it will be sustained. None of it will last if you don't have adequate supervision. And it's not just that there's somebody there who's signing off on what's going on. It's mean that there's someone who's actually paying attention and is actively supervising, monitoring, critiquing, retraining, correcting, disciplining, active supervision. And that has been a huge problem forever. And one of the things I noticed in their report, that there are still instances where supervisors aren't even in the same shift as the people they're supervising. Well, that's not possible.
Not everyone believes NOPD is being transformed. Tamara Jackson leads Silence is Violence.
I will say that not much has changed on the ground in terms of community engagement with law enforcement. There is some improvement. However, the community still share their frustrations about the interactions of law enforcement, some of the aggressive tones and nature, and the community just does not trust the police. When you're sharing information about investigations and you are looking to have that safety net, that support from law enforcement, and it's not there, the individuals are concerned about, should I even share information about this homicide? Should I call the police about this domestic violence incident? When in fact, we all, including Silence is Violence, encourage individuals to share their stories, to speak up about crime that happens, but they don't always get the necessary response from law enforcement. We are getting inundated with calls about the response times when people are in crises. Law enforcement is not usually responsive timely because they have a manpower shortage, so that's a problem. So citizens are concerned, like, what should they do? What options do they have? And they don't have many.
New Orleans has dramatically reduced its homicide count. It hasn't been this low since 1971. But Jackson says families of murder victims she tries to connect with police often receive little contact from detectives, and those families complain to her about the city's crime cameras.
Especially if there's a crime camera where a homicide happened. then everybody wants to know, well, why that crime camera person who's watching couldn't intervene in a timely manner, or why the suspect is still at large and we have it on video that this crime has happened.
The Real-Time Crime Center, run by the New Orleans Office of Homeland Security, links to 400 city cameras in white boxes with flashing lights attached to utility poles all over town, plus at least 150 privately owned cameras, and there's a push to increase all of them. Technicians monitor the camera network 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, assisting police, emergency medical services, and the fire department. Except when first responders in the field ask if something shows up on camera, the city says technicians watch only when citizen calls to 911 trigger cameras to pop up on their computer screens.
The computer then alerts the technician to the location of that 911 call and the location of cameras within a geographic area around that 911 call. And the technician then can look at the video and determine if there's anything relevant that's worth pursuing from an investigative standpoint, something that would assist public safety, typically the police. Looking at global events, we are a tourism city. There was some pretty serious issues in the French Quarter with some crime incidents that happened on Bourbon Street. That kind of started the genesis for this program, realizing very quickly that this was something that could be spread citywide and really assist public safety. We're able to save police officers time, and we're able to get these videos to them faster than them having to canvass and go door to door and look for videos. We've probably saved them about 3,000 man-hours of time, which the police department is getting back more patrols, more officers on the street, more cars driving. It's really the efficiency. The efficiency is what we have created. I think that this center has the ability to improve the entire criminal justice system. I think that people will be held accountable for crimes that they commit. The evidence in most cases that is on video is pretty irrefutable. It assists the police in making better arrests. It assists the district attorney in making a better case. And overall, I think that culmination of all of that will make the criminal justice system better.
But when the city refused to provide a map of publicly visible camera locations to a big part of the criminal justice system, the Public Defender's Office and the ACLU of Louisiana sued the city in civil district court.
On one level, they want the map because if their clients are accused of a crime and their clients happen to have been in a different location, the cameras may have picked them up in that location, and that would be exculpatory evidence. Or any other way that the cameras may have provided exculpatory evidence. If, for instance, they say that their clients are at a specific location and they're not, and the camera shows that they're not there at that location, that would be helpful to them as well. Those are taxpayer-funded cameras, and taxpayers have every right to know where those cameras are. Aside from just that general sort of secrecy that surrounded that issue, we have a number of concerns. We have concerns about the threats to constitutional rights, but we also think that the cameras have never been proven effective at preventing crime. And we've seen that throughout the country. We've seen that in other countries. Study after study have shown that there really is no proof that these cameras actually prevent crime or reduce crime overall. And we have concerns that they have a potential for abuse. And when I say abuse, there's a variety of ways that the cameras can be abused. Discriminatory targeting, we know from previous studies that these cameras disproportionately are used to target minorities, African Americans, that they can be used for voyeurism, male operators using them to scan women's bodies, and that institutionally and personally they can be used for ways that aren't essentially law enforcement or legitimate government use. And we also have an overall concern that this is going to have a kind of a chilling effect on the culture and erode trust with the community.
I like to look at this as a monitoring center, not a surveillance center. There is no way that two technicians can watch 500 cameras at one time, 24 hours a day. It just doesn't work that way. We're an incident-based system. we respond to calls that come into 911. And so, being incident-based, we're looking at a camera at a specific time, at a specific period, and trying to find if there's any relevant footage or evidence in that video. So that would be a distinction that I would make very quickly, is that there is no way to watch all of these cameras all the time.
The Independent Police Monitor issued a public letter expressing community concerns about the crime cameras.
We don't have oversight over the RTCC, or the Real-Time Crime Center, but it is a tool like any other tool that the NOPD uses, and we're watching it closely. We are already aware of one incident in which a young man was sought out because of the crime cameras. And so the question is, was there a reasonable suspicion there to actually go and encounter him or detain him and question him? We're still working through that, but those are some of the things we're worried about. How is this tool being used like any other tool, like pursuits or guns or anything else? So we just looked at that. And we note that that's really important because NOPD is still not in full compliance with stop, searches, and arrests. But you gotta have oversight. Everybody has oversight. I have oversight. The oversight for NOPD has oversight, so everybody's gotta have it. So we just wanna be more involved in that. We know that NOPD is the biggest user of this tool, so their police monitor needs to be involved as well.
The city wants people and organizations to connect their private security cameras to the Real-Time Crime Center through a partnership with the New Orleans Police and Justice Foundation called SafeCam Platinum. Information is available at safecamnola.com. Nearly 900 cameras like this one allow the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office to watch inmates and staff at the Orleans Justice Center, the new jail in use since 2015. New Orleans' jail system has been under federal oversight since 2013 to protect the constitutional rights of people detained there and the safety of prisoners and employees.
Well, look, keep in mind that the crumbling buildings that we were in before, where we had a whole lot of hidden spots, where deputies were not able to go in there, where you didn't have cameras, that contributed a lot to the lack of safety. We're a lot safer here. We have a lot less violence because we have a lot more accountability. And when someone has an issue now, all we have to do is press stop, rewind, and play it forward. And we can see exactly what happened. The deputies are on the housing unit, so they're there when it happens. We're having some challenges with staffing. Every agency in America has challenges with staffing, whether it's the police department, sheriff's office. So we're working through those things. And we think that the latest ability that we've had now to pay people better has made a big difference as well.
After little progress meeting consent decree standards, a 2016 court order pushed Sheriff Gussman aside from jail operations and created the job of compliance director, held by Darnley Hodge since February 2018.
So the sheriff's office has made a remarkable improvement in terms of complying with the consent judgment, in my opinion.
At a May 2019 hearing, U.S. District Judge Lance Afric called the most recent compliance report the best report this court has seen since the litigation began. He said, "It's clear that significant progress is being made, but we do have a ways to go." The to-do list ranged from use of force training, adequate supervision to safely operate the jail, mental health improvements, better tracking of all health care, down to sanitary dishwashing. Compliance Director Hodge says the change he made, called unit management, is a massive improvement for the 1,438-bed jail, which averages about 1,100 inmates a day.
In this jail, there are 4 floors. Each floor has 360 inmates. Now, in the wider community, you have some jails, but the total jail is less than 200 inmates, 100 inmates. Most jails in the United States have between, believe it or not, between 40 and 100. And so I split the jail down into units and put each unit under a different commander, rather than having one person managing 1,400 inmates, we have it split up by unit, where one post manages 360 inmates each.
Loyola University law professor and prison researcher Andrea Armstrong says that practice has led to better safety and security.
Where I see the progress being made is by virtue of the consent decree, they have been forced to develop and publish policies about and rules about how the facility should operate. And what's crazy is that the jail was operating without these rules internally. The work that's yet to be done is how do you incorporate and implement those policies? Are they trained on those policies? What happens when those policies aren't adhered to, right? And that's where the real accountability happens. It's a hard job to cage people. And if we're going to have our community members involved in caging other community members, then we need to make sure that they all have the tools that they need, which is the training in de-escalation, in recognizing mental illness, in dealing with substance abuse, and particularly around medical, because often it's the correctional staff that is the first line of response.
Professor Armstrong has been tracking deaths in the New Orleans jail all the way back to 1877.
We are one of the deadliest jails in the country. Right now, we're seeing those deaths come as a result of medical practices and detox procedures, when people are kind of undergoing detox procedures. And that's a shift from what we saw, say, a decade prior, when the majority of deaths were around violence that was occurring within the facility.
We definitely notice an uptick of deaths from people who should have been supervised closely, people on a medical tier, people with detox. And that's not only the sheriff's responsibility, it's also the responsibility of the people who are providing health care in the facility. So we have to be careful as a city who we sign contracts with and who we allow to care for those most vulnerable in the jail. We believe that jail should not be a place where people's lives are in danger, and we also believe that New Orleans locks up too many residents. We do not believe that the consent decree has been effective in making the jail safer.
At the last compliance hearing, the federal judge and monitors overseeing the consent judgment insisted that all parties work together closely to renovate the temporary detention center to house acute mental patients. The Cantrell administration said it hopes to finish the renovation by March 2020 and construction of a permanent building 2 years later.
Right now, we are urging the city, our elected officials, to not expand the jail, but to care for those who need special attention through a retrofit option.
We have a commitment and an obligation, and it's a constitutional obligation, to the folks that are there now. And right now, there is not a system for humanely caring for those folks. And so we are over a year, we're a couple years behind delivering those services. So we've got to make sure that we do what's morally right, and what we have already obligated ourselves to do, that's what we need to do. That needs to be delivered.
Debate continues over the housing solution for people in the New Orleans jail with acute mental health needs. But no one disputes that mental health care is a giant criminal justice problem.
The status of mental health and how we can help people avoid incarceration by giving them more support on the outside, I think is important for this community. We've seen over the last 10 years or so a dismantling of the mental health system. So many people tell me about how the third floor of Charity Hospital was the go-to place for people with mental illnesses. Well, you know, it's not there anymore. And there has not been a good enough substitute for that. And as a result, a lot of those issues come directly here to the jail before they would go somewhere else.
One of the biggest issues affecting public safety, not just in New Orleans, but statewide, and it's creating a tremendous problem for law enforcement and imposing tremendous costs on local criminal justice system, is the state's decision under Governor Jindal to reduce mental health services. So what's happening now is that because the state has cut back on mental health services, people that used to be treated with medication and had access to the health system, they're not getting that treatment. And if they commit a crime, they're being arrested for that crime because police take an oath to enforce the laws of Louisiana. And as they arrest those people and they realize they have mental health issues, the sheriff is responsible for providing more mental health services for people in custody than those people can receive when they're out on the streets. And the costs, rather than being absorbed by the state, are having to be absorbed by the local parishes and municipalities. And it's a tremendous burden on the local system. So I think that one of the things that the state can do to reduce crime across Louisiana and reduce the cost for local jurisdictions is to revive and rebuild mental health services for at-need populations, high-risk populations, because it invariably defaults down to the criminal justice system, and the criminal justice system isn't designed to be a mental health treatment service provider.
If you and I get sick, we go to a hospital, we don't go to a jail. If I need mental health treatment, I go find a doctor, I don't find a sheriff. And I think to get our communities healing, we need to reorient ourselves around the fact that we need to be building capacity so that mental health is not handled in the criminal legal system. But to the extent it is, we need people who are dedicated and trained to do it. In our office, we have a specialized attorney, a senior staff attorney for mental health, who deals with all of the mental health cases, the not guilty by reason of insanity, competency hearings. He's the consult or the lawyer on those cases for those special needs clients. And what we're finding is we need more beds, we need more education and access for our communities, because I think there would be people alive today if our communities had access to quality mental health care. And substance abuse is another issue. I would often have judges say, I'm going to put your client in jail so that they can dry out, so that they can detox. Well, what we're finding is clients are dying through the detox process in jail. That's number one. But also number two, drugs are in the jail. There's people who go in sober and die of overdoses in jail because of how easy it is to get drugs, the access to drugs, and the pervasiveness that substance abuse as an illness presents itself with in our communities. And so I think there's still work to be done on giving some flexibility in our criminal legal system for someone who comes in clearly suffering from mental health problems, get them out of our system and allow the system to kick people out as opposed to forcing them through it, so that we can get better results for some of those people.
I'm upset, I'm angry.
Juvenile crime in New Orleans, is it out of control or exaggerated?
I'm disheartened at the loss, another loss of an innocent citizen.
There's a debate intensified by the May 2019 shootings of a husband and wife who walked outside their home to check the alarm going off in their car to find a burglar inside. The woman was killed by a bullet to the head. Police say the 17-year-old they booked for second-degree murder had been arrested the month before for another auto burglary.
Most importantly, to our parents, it is time to take ownership of your kids. Be responsible for these kids. We, as a department, we as a criminal justice system, we as a city government cannot do this alone. But we do know that we have had a recent uptick in juvenile crime, more specifically auto burglaries and auto thefts. We have made several arrests, over the last few months. Countless. Every district across this city has made countless arrests. And we find that we are rearresting some of the same individuals. So it is up to us to figure out what it is that we can do better. But I'm asking the community, I am begging the parents to do their part.
Well, I think we have a spree of juvenile criminal activity that is in epidemic proportions in the city of New Orleans. I have said that the violent juvenile offender right now is the most serious crime problem that we face in the city of New Orleans in the year 2019.
Jeff Asher's firm, AH Datalytics, provides public safety analysis for the New Orleans City Council.
Juveniles typically make up about 6% of all arrests, and juveniles with violent offenses last year and this year made up about 1.5% of people with all arrests. So you can talk about an increase in juveniles being arrested for vehicle burglaries, which exists. You can talk about an increase in vehicle burglaries citywide, which exists. Pretty dramatic increase in vehicle burglaries citywide, but you're only talking about a small fraction of the overall big picture situations.
Data released by Asher on June 10th shows juvenile violent crime arrests down 22% this year to date over 2018, and juvenile arrests for nonviolent charges down 33%. In fact, all arrests are down as the city shifts its focus to serious violent crime. The PAY ordinance, Police Alternatives for Youth, intentionally drives down juvenile arrests as summons are issued and case management is used to help kids out of the juvenile justice system. In response to the Cleveland Avenue murder, the city announced initiatives to reduce juvenile crime, including a return to enforcement of the 1994 juvenile curfew law. Police will drop kids at Covenant House if they're caught breaking curfew and a parent or guardian is not home. Parents will receive a summons if a child is picked up 3 times on curfew violations. The city's creating 100 summer jobs for young people touched by the juvenile justice system and promoting the many child summer learning programs offered at all branches of its libraries. And they're encouraging parents to enroll their children in summer activities including camps and competitive swimming offered by the New Orleans Recreation Development Commission. The city's also touting the resources of the Orleans Parish School Board's Youth Opportunity Center. Juvenile court judges changed their detention policy. Now all juveniles arrested on charges that pose a public safety risk will be detained until seen by a judge. The judges said they made this decision because they've seen an alarming increase in delinquent activity as well as youth recidivism. The Louisiana Center for Children's Rights warns this move will overcrowd the juvenile detention center and send more youth to the adult jail.
We need to do what actually works to make our city safer and to set kids up for success. Funneling children into the justice system and locking them up hasn't worked. So it's time that we look at what we can do that's actually effective. We should prevent crime by investing in children on the front end, and if they do mess up, responding in ways that actually work.
The chief juvenile court judge sat down for an interview prior to the policy change.
It is very unfortunate, some of the events that have happened in our city, and that if we had a crystal ball and we were aware of which child that committed a crime that's not considered a violent crime but a property crime, and which will then escalate and go out and do something different, that most certainly we would try to make sure that those kids are at least monitored. But we're doing the best that we can. These kids are released on alternatives. These kids come in front of a judge. These kids, we look at what's going on in their community. We look at their arrest history. We also release them in programs, and we just really don't know which child may or may not go out there and do something that obviously takes the life of one of our great citizens in this city. And so those grieve us. And we look at also the fact that there is no way possible that every single child that commits one of these types of crimes can be detained. We don't have the space, we don't have the ability, and nor do we have the resources. And so also I would look at us looking at getting to these children before they get into juvenile court.
I don't think incarceration is necessarily the problem for all of the juvenile offenders. But I think certainly for the serious offenders and the violent offenders, incarceration may well be our only solution to the problem as it relates to them. I think to a large extent the police have got to be in a position to engage in proactive policing. They have to be able to go out there and look for criminal activity.
Meantime, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice Coordination says it's looking at all avenues relating to juvenile crime.
How we can do things better, what can we implement, what can we revise. Right now we're looking at implementing an ERC, Evening Reporting Center for youth, who have committed some sort of crime and have gone through the juvenile system. We're also looking at system mandated programs operated by the court that these kids can actually be mandated to by a judge. And we're also looking at bringing back the electronic monitoring system.
Juvenile justice has also been a focus at the state level.
Until recently, Louisiana was one of very few states that automatically prosecuted all 17-year-olds as adults, even though 17-year-olds can't sign a contract, they can't vote, they can't even buy cigarettes. But in 2016, the legislature overwhelmingly voted to bring 17-year-olds into the juvenile justice system by passing the Raise the Age Act.
Since March 2019, 17-year-olds charged with nonviolent offenses have been included in the juvenile justice system. Starting July 2020, the same will apply to 17-year-olds accused of any crime.
Kids who are held in adult facilities are at great risk of physical and sexual assault and to die by suicide. Raise the Age is really important because 17-year-olds are children. They're defined as children in every other place in the law, and they will finally be treated as children in the appropriate justice system in Louisiana. Kids who are prosecuted in the juvenile justice system instead of the adult system are less likely to reoffend because the juvenile system has the resources and education that kids need to succeed.
And there's still a good bit of room for prosecutors to use their discretion to charge kids as adults. And our district attorney currently has not shied away from that. But by and large, we hope to see a lot more kids being treated in the juvenile court system because that system is actually designed for kids. And the adult system is designed for punishment, it's designed for retribution. It is not designed with an adolescent development model in mind.
In 2017, the Louisiana legislature passed 10 bills, part of the Justice Reinvestment Initiative.
What these reforms were able to do was significantly reduce our overall prison population, as well as ensure that proper resources are being invested in the communities, both on the end of survivors of crime, but also folks re-entering into society. As a result of these reforms, we've actually seen the Louisiana prison population drop by about 15%.
New sentencing and habitual offender laws mean the majority of state prison beds are occupied by violent offenders. Before the initiative, Louisiana was leading the United States in incarceration at a rate nearly twice the national average. The state was spending $700 million a year on corrections, while 1 in 3 people released from prison returned within 3 years. Since the changes, the state fell to number 2 on the locked up list.
Oklahoma is now ahead of us, and that's the first time in modern history Louisiana has not led the nation in incarceration. We used to be ahead by a significant margin. The fact that we've seen such a drop in incarceration that we're actually below someone is significant.
Metropolitan Crime Commission President Rafael Goyeneche is concerned that Louisiana promoted the Texas model of reducing penitentiary population, but did not prepare the way Texas did.
They invested $200 million into rehabilitative services, both for offenders in custody and subsequent to release. And then as the population went down, there was another $200 million that was invested. And so they put $400 million into rehabilitative services to prevent the likelihood of people that are being released from coming back into the system. So in Louisiana, we didn't have $200 million. We didn't have $2 million. So what we did was we reduced the penalties and reduced the amount of time that offenders serve, with a promise that the money that was saved in year one, 70% would be reinvested into rehabilitative services in year two.
The Department of Corrections savings in the 2017-18 budget year was $12.2 million.
So this legislation was promoted as justice reinvestment, and the reinvestment, I think, has been done backwards. We should have prepared for the offenders coming back into the community and had programs available to them rather than playing catch up a year behind.
I would argue be patient, and I'd also argue that what we did before, which was locking everyone up, did not have great results, and you have to really give time for it to play out.
In 2018, the legislature placed a constitutional amendment on the ballot to require a unanimous jury verdict in all non-capital felony cases for offenses committed starting January 1st, 2019. 64% of voters said yes to ending split jury decisions allowed in Louisiana since 1898.
So non-unanimous juries were really created to do two things. One, to nullify the black vote if African Americans were in fact able to get on the jury, but two, also make it easier to convict black people. In fact, if they were defendants in a crime, in a case, they wouldn't have to prosecutors wouldn't have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, they would just have to prove their case beyond 3 doubts. That changed in 1974 to have a requirement of 10 votes to 2 votes to carry a particular verdict. And we know that since 1989, in fact, 12 people were exonerated that were originally convicted via a non-unanimous verdict. So what that means is when those people went to trial, there was either one person or 2 people that voted not guilty and were right. But unfortunately, those 1 or 2 votes could not prevent an innocent person from going to prison. So when we think about the importance of having unanimous juries in Louisiana, we are getting rid of a vestige of Jim Crow within our criminal legal system. We also are creating standards within our jury trials that are consistent with 49 other states in the country. 49 states require prosecutors to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. They require all 12 individuals on their jury to agree, and now Louisiana is in line with that.
Also in 2018, Louisiana lawmakers restored voting rights to formerly incarcerated people with felony convictions. Voter registration began in March 2019.
If you are someone who was formerly convicted, you've paid out to society, you've served without conflict for over 5 years or more, that's 36,000 people, including those people who were on probation and parole. There really becomes a compelling state interest in restoring voting rights to those people because you want them to fully rejoin society. Part of what incentivizes an individual to not commit crimes or recidivize is to make sure they feel like they are part of the community. And when you artificially make them outsiders from the communities, municipalities, the countries they serve, you create a disconnect which could lead to recidivism. So the more we mainstream those people who are formerly incarcerated back into society, the easier it is for them to become productive citizens.
Jeffrey Bowman works as facilities manager for Goodwill Industries in New Orleans. He went through an inmate re-entry program offered by Goodwill after serving 15 years in a federal prison on a nonviolent drug charge.
When I stepped out of prison, when I went in, they didn't have anything like Facebook or smartphones, so I was literally stepping back to the future. And it was crazy and so much on me. I didn't have a lot of options either, because coming out after that much time, you're extremely lost. These programs are extremely important because without these, of course, people go back into criminal activity. They end up doing things that they don't want to do.
Yes, Jeffrey Bowman is a participant in our Training to Work program, but Jeff has done such a fabulous job because now he's no longer a participant, but he's almost grown into the spokesperson for our ex-offender programs because he is a Goodwill employee.
Kim Evans-Rougeon also chairs the New Orleans Reentry Task Force, a collaboration of nonprofits and faith-based organizations.
So in 2016, we got together, we created the New Orleans Reentry Task Force to focus on some of the critical needs of the ex-offender, such as housing, transportation, We looked at employment, mental health issues. We looked at substance abuse issues. We looked at legal issues to make sure that once they reacclimated into society, we had some supportive and wraparound services to address their needs once they were released.
The task force formed on the heels of the Louisiana Prisoner Reentry Initiative, an effort aimed at reducing recidivism and incarceration rates.
So in November of 2017, we saw our first round of low to moderate risk offenders being released. The area, this particular area, saw about 180 people being released from correctional facilities in November of 2017. The New Orleans Reentry Task Force made sure that we had foot soldiers on the ground. All of the members got together to make sure that once those people were dropped off at the probation and parole, we met them. We met them and we did case assessments to find out who need housing, who had any mental health issues. It ran the gambit.
The money saved from housing less inmates has been directed to reentry programs statewide, like those offered by the Orleans Task Force.
Orleans Parish was so successful in the early release program. We had like 170 to 180 people released. We may have only seen like maybe 9 go back to jail. So we were very successful in making sure that we met their needs.
Without that assistance, reentry can fail.
The streets start calling your name. And I hate to say it, but what happens is you got to feed your family. You've got to eat. You got to have clothing. You got to have the basic necessities that you need to live. And that's not possible if nobody wants to hire you, nobody wants to. So, of course, people go back into criminal activities. And so the actual formula here is to educate and get people working and show them that they have self-worth.
So when folks first arrive at the First 72 Plus, we accept people from all over the place. So a lot of our clients just show up at the front door during office hours. We have clothing for all folks of all shapes and sizes back here. So we have pants and suits, we have basic dress shirts, we have casual wear.
Kelly Orions is the co-director of the First 72 Plus, a reentry program founded by former inmates to assist those newly released in the return to society after incarceration. Upon release, they often just have a $10 check and a bus ticket. The First 72 steps in to help them with basics and a new life.
The two biggest contributors to recidivism are access to housing and access to employment. And obviously those are intimately intertwined. If you don't have a job, you have no ability to pay your rent. And if you have no ability to pay your rent, you can't access a place to live.
That 72, that stands for one of the most critical times of a person's life upon his release or her release from the system. Those 3 days is going to determine whether or not that individual is going to make it or not. That plus, that stands for the wraparound services we provide. Housing, clothing, food, ID, social security cards, birth certificate, health insurance, employment, whatever need a formerly incarcerated person would need.
So we are standing in the First 72 Plus transitional house. This is where the First 72 Plus started back in September 2014 when we opened up this house to provide free housing to 6 formerly incarcerated men at a time. So this provides a place to stay for someone right when they come home from prison, rent-free. They have no financial obligations to stay here for 90 to 120 days. What it directly provides is a place to stay. What it indirectly provides is a way to get out of prison, because if you don't have an approved residence, you won't be released from prison in Louisiana.
This is officially my last day. I will be moving into my own apartment.
Fabian Harper spent more than 28 years in prison since age 16, when sentenced for being a principal to second-degree murder. He was paroled in 2018.
Since being here, I went through their program of finding a job, getting my driver's license, and then I kind of graduated from there and participate with their small business incubator, where I was helped to start a business, my own landscape business.
Nearly 500 former inmates have gone through the program.
We haven't lost anyone yet. What happens is our motto is us helping us. By me being formerly incarcerated, I'm helping another formerly incarcerated person. Well, these guys can identify with me or one of my other people that's part of the organization because we've been there and done that. I'm just like them.
It's helped Troy Rhodes and Troy DeLone, each incarcerated for 16 years, now employed by Total Community Action.
I believe that it's agencies like the First 72 Plus is very helpful in the individual who's returning home from incarceration to adjust to society. So the First 72 helps with that process, because you have to think, if a person don't have these necessities in the first 72 hours, it could very well determine which way he go, right or left.
You know, we talk about public safety, right? So this is a part of making the public more safe when you give people opportunities to make better decisions, not only make better decisions, but put people in better predicaments, you know, such as finding housing, employment, and things of that nature, whatever barriers is challenges that people are faced with. And then eventually, you know, it's not a handout, it's a hand up. Right? You're teaching people how to become more self-sufficient.
It's just all a matter of making people feel like, we know you made a mistake, but we're here to give you that hand up. So that's my I guess that's my plea to the whole state and to the city of New Orleans. If you have jobs, give them a chance. My God, they did the time. Give them a chance.
New Orleans took a chance 13 years ago in a quest to seek safety and justice. Much progress has been made, but there's much more to be done.
Reshaping a Greater New Orleans, Seeking Safety and Justice, made possible by Baptist Community Ministries. Reshaping a Greater New Orleans, Seeking Safety and Justice continues with a WYES Community Forum. Welcome to the Charlie and Jeanette Corman Performance Studio at the WYES Paulette and Frank Stewart Innovation Center for Educational Media. We invite viewers to submit questions and comments. Tweet us at WYES TV. Use the hashtag SafeCity, or email safecity@wyes.org. And now, our moderator, WYES Community Projects producer, Marcia Kavanaugh.
And good evening, and thanks so much for joining us. And I want to thank our studio audience that is here tonight also at our WYES studio. So in this first hour, we just examined where New Orleans is now in terms of public safety and justice reform. So let me introduce the panel of leaders joining our discussion about what comes next. What challenges do we face in the months to come and years to come? We want to welcome Chief Shaun Ferguson, Superintendent of New Orleans Police.
Good evening.
Good evening. Daniel Erspamer, CEO of the Pelican Institute for Public Policy. I know I probably destroyed your name. I'm sorry about that. Aaron Clark-Rizzo, who is the Executive Director of the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights. Dr. Jennifer Avengo, the Health Director for the City of New Orleans. Welcome. And also Flozell Daniels, who is the President and CEO of the Foundation for Louisiana. Okay, we have a lot to discuss because a lot of issues facing the city in terms of safety and also criminal justice reform. And our mayor has one of the first things she did, she said, we've got to tackle gun violence. And so she established a task force which recently released some preliminary recommendations. I think the final recommendations will come out in a couple of months one big part of it is a public health component. That's where you come in, Dr. Avengo, Jennifer, if I can call you that.
Sure, of course.
Can you sort of explain what is it that you guys have in mind in terms of what's described as an interdisciplinary entity to work with individuals on a social level?
Right, so fundamentally we see, and we're not alone in seeing violence as a public health issue. And that might be sort of an unusual concept for many, but what we mean is that it is a threat to health, well-being, and life that can be prevented, contained, and treated with the right approach. That historically a criminal justice only focus has not been successful. And so like we've made strides in diseases like polio or reducing auto fatalities using that public health approach, we in many communities around the country are applying that approach to gun violence in particular. And so the city has adopted this wholeheartedly with the work of the task force and in general, and it takes on a couple of forms, namely prevention and intervention. Preventing violence comes in many forms. Some of them really address the historic inequities that many of our communities who are susceptible rather than immune to violence face. So that's lack of access to education, employment, structural racism, unsafe housing. That requires policy. What prevention also means is culturally competent meeting people where they are by messengers who are from the community, who understand needs of community and what it's going to take to prevent one person, one neighborhood, one area from becoming more violent. That's part of what we have in the recommendations, and that continues the work of our Cure Violence program, who have been on the ground doing that. We also understand that we have to treat our victims of gun violence because we know the highest risk of being a victim of gun violence is having been a previous victim of gun violence. And so we have to intervene at that point, whether it's in the hospital with families, whether it's linking individuals who are at high risk to mental health treatment, to employment opportunities so that their recidivism does not become yet another statistic, excuse me. We have to also evaluate what we're doing and understand what intervention is going to work for the right person. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We need help from our academic partners, but we also really need to do it in a respectful way that meets the community where they are.
And that you just said you need help from your academic partners. You need help from a lot of partners in the community. So this entity hasn't been totally defined yet. But it's a progress. It's something in progress right now, something in the works. But how will all of these folks who are working together, how will you all identify who perhaps is at risk, who needs to have some sort of intervention?
Right. Well, we already have many tools to do that. We work closely with social service agencies who identify whether it's youth that are high risk, or again, whether it's a victim of violence or a perpetrator of violence. We know they are at the highest risk to be seriously hurt or injured. And by identifying them and truly working with them in a way that's going to prevent further injury, further morbidity, further damage to their families, to their communities. We need help. We're already getting that information and getting help. We want to make sure that what we're able to provide them with is meaningful and respectful and sort of elevates what we're able to provide.
And so, Chief, solving crime, solving homicides is a really big part of this as well. So what is NOPD, doing to step that up?
So what we've done recently within the last few months, before I go into that, I want to commend Dr. Avengo for what she said, because I think that is very important. For so long, police departments or law enforcement agencies alone have felt that they were the only ones who are responsible or have been charged with that responsibility of addressing homicides or any violent crimes of that nature. We have been looked upon as the counselor, as the psychologist, as well as the law enforcer, and we cannot do it alone. And we are glad to hear that we are not the only ones in this fight anymore. So to answer your questions, over the last couple of months, we have trained several of our additional detectives outside of our homicide detectives to be better detectives. We trained them in homicide. So what I've charged each district with is identifying a very skilled set, a very skillful detective from each district to attend a week-long training in homicide investigation. And as such, if when a homicide occurs in their district, they in essence are now the lead investigators. And they team up with homicide. So having a better investigation, a better understanding of investigations will help us to identify or do a better job at solving. In doing so, we reduce retaliatory shootings, which would reduce violent crimes overall, in our opinion.
And what's your solve rate right now?
Right now, our solve rate is at 78%.
Okay, so you want to step that up even more, and like you said, the reason why this is important, because it'll stop retaliatory crimes.
Absolutely would.
Okey-doke. Now, a big part of this also is community engagement. And we have David Bocage, who's in our audience right now, with the city, with the Cure Violence program. And community engagement is a major component. Why?
Just for the reason that we're here tonight, and thank you for allowing me to be here. You all just presented it in such a fashion that it was a great segue into my question that I wanted to pose to the panel, which is knowing and understanding the model that we have in Cure Violence being of a public health approach, and it's been proven over almost 20 years to work, not only in theory but in practice. How will we work locally to fulfill those studies and practices that have been proven to be successful within the departments that are not only here but beyond, to make a huge headway into the mental health issues that we have in the community, and offering more preventative measures through behavioral health therapy and cognitive therapy as well. So let me pose that question as well, two-part, being that we need to find a way to expand our efforts that were formed in Central City in the uptown area, but in other areas of the city. So how can we quite possibly come together to expand our efforts in other parts of the city? Thank you.
How do we do that? Who wants to take that? Chief, go to you first.
Chief first. It's ironic that he brings this point up. I was just involved in a meeting this morning. We discussed looking at various services, nonprofit organizations across the city, that each one is working in its own silo and have their own mission. Mm-hmm. At some point in time, we should bring everyone to the table and combine those missions and see how we can work together holistically to get a better community for us all.
Right. So community engagement is really, really important, I know, for the police department. You need the community's participation. You need the community's cooperation. You need the trust of the community.
Yes.
And so what are you guys trying to do to build on that, as David was asking? What'd you say?
So to build on the trust that what we have just pushed even further, I think we've done a phenomenal job over the last few years in gaining the public's trust. We've been very transparent in our investigation, very transparent in anything that we're involved in, even police officer misconduct. We're very open and honest. Hey, did we make a mistake? We're willing to admit that, but also share with everyone what we can do better. So reaching out to the public and letting them know that if you see something, say something. We need you to be our eyes and ears, because we will not be there all the time, and we need that help just as much as they need our help.
It's very important to helping solve these crimes that do occur.
So.
Flozell, I know you were on this task force also.
Sure.
So what do you think should be contributed to this?
Well, I just want to pick up on this idea of community engagement and actual performance. I appreciate the chief's position and this incredible work that he's taken on. I think one of the things that we hear at the grassroots level, and as someone who's lost a son to murder, when you talk to people who are on the ground, who have lost family and friends, they really want to understand, are we supporting and staffing this work in a way that gets us there? Are we going to be able to build this trust over time? I think, we understand the history that we have in this community with police and with the public writ large. We have work to do to build trust so that we can actually make sure people feel that they can be safe. And, one of the things that's great about this task force is giving us a chance to finally face down this violence issue. You often hear us talk about, well, we're going to deal with the nonviolent folk, but we're not going to deal with it. The truth is, this country has such a history in violence in this community. We believe this is generational work. We're going to have to make the investments that Dr. Avengo talked about. We're going to have to make sure that we are lockstep with community. And what I advise is that we really lock hand in hand with people who have been victims of violence in talking about what does it take to make our communities safe. We know the research tells us that when communities feel safe, they're much less likely to have retaliatory violence or to engage in violence. And we should be doing the difficult work of talking to people who have committed violence. Yes. That's where some of the main answers are that we typically don't talk about. There's a real opportunity for us to engage with people who in the past have been violent and who have seen how to move past it.
So it really is just, it's a growing community effort to tackle this problem, it would seem. That's what I'm hearing from you guys, coming from very many sources to work together. And one other big issue that we've been facing as a community is the increased use of opioids and heroin, and then seeing overdoses and deaths resulting from this. I mean, actually outpacing the number of gun deaths. Right. Yes. Homicides down. Homicide rate is really down in the city right now. We have been seeing this problem. Fentanyl is just an added issue with it, and it's causing deaths among our people. Jennifer, as a physician, what are you guys seeing? What do you now? Are we tapering off at all? Is there any lessening of this, or is it still a growing problem?
So it remains a significant problem. I mean, we would call it an epidemic. And you're right, the opioid-associated deaths outpaced gun violence deaths in our community. Whereas we have more or less held steady. Other communities have fared worse, but we are by no means out of the woods. We take a harm reduction approach because that we know is the best approach to attempting to stem the tide and reverse the trend. Again, criminal justice can't solve this problem alone. It has to be multifaceted. It has to be interdisciplinary, collaborative, from the top down, bottom up, everybody in between. One of the things that illustrates that the city has done is create an opioid task force, which brings everyone to the table, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's community advocates, whether it is care providers, behavioral health, addiction, all to the table to discuss what they're seeing, trends, and also to share new programs that are opening up. We have direct connections with emergency departments, with EMS, to link opiate overdose survivors directly to treatment, because we know that the sooner they get in and the more we can support them and wrap around services, the better off that they're going to be. There's been a huge number of efforts over the past few years at the city and the state level to put naloxone, which is the opiate overdose reversal drug, into the hands of anyone who needs it, particularly our first responders. There's a standing order right now that says anybody can go to the pharmacy and ask for it and get it without a prescription. And I've done it myself, and it works. And we want to get that to anybody. We teach classes free of charge to any citizen in the city who wants to learn how to use it. That has saved lives. Chief Ferguson's officers, our fire department, our EMS, simply having that life-saving medication has saved lives already.
But it continues to be a serious public health issue.
Absolutely.
All right. We're going to move on with our discussion right now, and let's turn to jail population. Before Katrina, there were about 6,800 people detained in the various old buildings that made up the New Orleans jail. 14 years later, that number is down by 84%. There are initiatives underway and also bold new ideas to drive that even lower. The number of people held in the New Orleans jail averaged 3,000 a day in 2010. On June 10, 2019, there were 1,200. The city aims to reduce the jail population to under 1,000 in 2020, using millions in grant dollars from the Safety and Justice Challenge.
We are maintaining public safety as a priority. Those that are being held for violent crimes, they will remain in jail, but we're looking at the low-violent, non-violent offenders who could possibly be out and back to their communities and their families.
If we're going to promote and advocate for lesser pretrial jail populations, we also have to be prepared to fund more pretrial services, including initiatives like electronic monitoring.
The number of individuals who are presently housed in the parish jail are there primarily because they have been engaged in violent criminal activity. It's not people who are there for minor misdemeanor offenses or traffic violations or nonviolent charges. We're talking about right now the baddest of the bad are being held in the parish jail. And it seems to me if you're going to reduce the population, that population, then I think that greatly impacts public safety.
At Criminal District Court, a pretrial services program uses a public safety assessment to help judges make detention and release decisions based on risk.
For those people who are low risk and would automatically just sit in jail and otherwise kind of deteriorate their families, their jobs, educational opportunities, why keep them in jail if it's unnecessary?
The Vera Institute of Justice introduced pretrial services to the city. Now it's got a bigger idea: get rid of money bail.
When a court focuses on setting a dollar amount to determine whether somebody is released or not released, they're putting aside public safety. Because we know, looking at the data, that 65% of the people who are in the highest risk groups, people arrested for offenses for which prison is mandatory, people arrested who score at the highest level of risk on the public safety assessment, 65% of them are purchasing their freedom. And by setting money bail, a judge is allowing them to do that.
I think the idea of no money bail is an idea whose time has come, and it is going to move us more toward fairness and equity in how we treat people coming through our criminal legal system.
The bail bond industry has a different outlook.
Well, if that individual is not going to court, then the victim of that particular crime is not getting their day in court. And when you talk about safety, as it pertains to what we do in the service we provide, we apprehend wanted fugitives from the community every day. That's what we do. And I don't know if we could actually have a safer community if there's no one to apprehend wanted fugitives.
People who have to pay to get out don't come back to court more often than those who are released on their own recognizance. The consequence of not coming back is more serious than having to pay. It's going to jail.
Ditching money bail for pretrial release is just one part of Vera's new report titled Paid in Full, a plan to end money injustice in New Orleans.
You have to pay money to get out. That's not the original meaning of bail, and it's not the norm in most places. On the other hand, at the back end of the system, we have all of these financial taxes, fines, fees, court costs imposed after a criminal case. And people, 85% of whom are too poor to have a lawyer, can't afford that. And they're at risk of going to jail. There are thousands of warrants issued. People are living in the shadows simply because they can't pay the cost, a cost that should be borne by all New Orleanians. It's our court system. We want it to work towards public safety, not work to always be looking for how to extract enough money to keep the system running. That's money injustice.
2 federal judges ruled in August 2018 that the judges of criminal court cannot make impartial decisions about bail or fines and fees, which finance about 25% of court operations. Vera says this creates an opportunity for New Orleans to become the first U.S. city to replace conviction fees and money bail with city funding that promotes safety and justice.
This court should not be funded on the backs of poor people, and we stand by that.
The city stepped up to pay the court what it lost from the federal rulings, and according to Vera, can fund the former shares of that money to the court, the DA, and public defender, with savings from a jail population reduced by 300 to nearly 700 people. The savings to New Orleans families by avoiding money bail and conviction fees, nearly $9 million a year.
So for those who care about safety, the money has to be eliminated. For those who care about fairness, money has to be eliminated. And for those who care about fiscal efficiency, stable funding, not spending money we don't have to spend to incarcerate people just because they're poor, saving the city and its taxpayers' money has to be eliminated.
Well, no bail. That would certainly be a change that the public would have to accept. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, we started these reforms boldly, I guess, back in 2010, 2011, 2012. Tons of investment of time from community leaders, from elected officials, foundations, and others who invested in this really simple idea of asking the question, can we do what works? Can we actually look at the evidence and come up with common sense approaches to not only make this community safer, but to make it more just, and we've been able to do that, right? The jail, as you noted in the piece, is down at historic levels. We were told if you do this, crime will skyrocket. In fact, crime has gone down. We, in fact, also see an opportunity for us to do something that's really important. If we care about violence, let's make sure people don't unnecessarily go to one of the most violent jails in America. These are tough conversations, but they're necessary discussions. This conversation about bail, fines, and fees, and money and justice, and this amazing report, Paid in Full, really leads us into the next step of what that justice looks like and what that safety looks like.
And Daniel, I know your group was really involved in the beginning of a statewide effort to reduce incarceration. You brought together groups that normally don't work together on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. This is amazing when you can bring pastors, a libertarian businessman, law enforcement, prosecutors, small government advocates, the ACLU, social justice advocates, all together around a table to get to a common solution. That's what we need more of in politics, whether it's in criminal justice or any other issue. And to Flozell's point, we've got to bring all of those people and groups and ideas back to the table to figure out how do we solve this funding issue. The piece is absolutely right. It's not a system that respects the fundamental American principles of rule of law and due process. And add to that, it's unjust to the people most at risk in our society of coming back to a life of crime. It's a system that's broken and has to be fixed.
So law enforcement, what are your views? What do you guys think about this, the reduced incarceration rates? Is this something that we're going on the right track with that?
I think we are. I mean, the bottom line is you should be identifying the root cause. Mm-hmm. Incarceration, I've said this before and time again, I continue to say incarceration is not the answer. Are we solving the true issue at this time? So in doing so, in reducing jail population, we have to also look at the other side, making sure that we create opportunities and programs for those that may have made a mistake. Mm-hmm. And that's what I would call that. We made a mistake or made a poor decision, and now they want to correct that decision.
And it also, go ahead, Aaron. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's also important that we keep this all in mind, especially in times when our fears are rising or when we're concerned or when we see spikes in certain types of crimes, because it's in those moments that unfortunately I think we revert to using those very policies that we're all in agreement don't work. And so in the juvenile justice context, as concerns have been rising, there have been more calls for those traditional responses of incarceration. And so we're seeing increases in juvenile detention as we're simultaneously decreasing our adult jail population. And so it's just particularly important in those times of stress and fear that we remain steady in our convictions.
And as you said, in fear. The community does become alarmed when they hear of incidences that have happened recently. And we're going to be delving really deeply into the juvenile crime issue. But first, I want to go back to the audience right now and talk to Tanisha Stevens, who is with the City's Safety and Justice Challenge, just for an update on what you guys are doing.
Good evening, and thank you for having me here this evening. My office is responsible for the Safety and Justice Challenge. MacArthur Foundation receiving a grant for $2 million to safely reduce our jail population. We have several initiatives that we are working on. As of this morning, our jail population is around 1130, so we are doing very good. Our target is 900 by 2020, so we are really working very hard, and we want to just make clear to people that we are reducing our jail population safely. And one thing I will continue to stand by, money bail does not make our city safer. That's right. We look at racial and ethnic disparities. We know that it is a lot of disparities and racial disparities as it relates to the criminal justice system as a whole. One thing to note is that the MacArthur Foundation has a strong focus on the adult population, so we're actually engaging them to look into the juvenile justice part of the MacArthur Foundation because they have not funded many juvenile issues, and the focus is on reducing the population on the adult side. However, I think if we take the adult side initiatives that we have put in place and have worked with and place them in the juvenile side, we can reduce our intake as it relates to the juvenile detention as well. So we're looking into that and seeing how we can implement those strategies among juvenile court and work with the judges there. Criminal District Court actually has the pretrial services, and it's working. The judges are releasing based on the sort of like the race score, but it's a risk assessment score that is given. So within the next couple of months, we will be doing a lot of community engagement throughout the city to educate people on our racial and ethnic disparity initiative that we have launched this month. We have a couple of forums that's coming up at the end of this month that we'll like to extend the invitation, and we'll share that information with the station as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Tanisha. I really do appreciate that. Of course, law enforcement and keeping the streets safe, as the title of our show says, seeking safety and justice, it really falls upon the shoulders of our brave men and women in NOPD. And you guys really face a lot of challenges. I mean, since Katrina, the ranks have been down, and that has presented challenges for you all. How are we doing with that now?
So we over the last year, we've made tremendous stride in that. Right now, we're currently staffed at 1,232 officers. Towards the latter part of last year, we're just over 1,100. So we're doing some magnificent things. Last week, we had a class to begin. A number of 36 individuals joined our team as recruits on last Monday, and on last Friday, the same week, we graduated a class of 25. So with the assistance of the Police and Justice Foundation, we have truly made some significant headway with getting our mission and our purpose out there about joining the NOPD and joining us in trying to make a difference for our city.
What are the numbers that you would love to reach? I mean, we've heard in the past 1,600. Are you still at that point?
So idealistic, yes. I mean, 1,500 and 1,600 would do us a very good, would give us a great number to serve our city the way it need and deserve to be served. Right now, I have some ambitious goals myself to try to push us. My goal right now is to hire 120 this year alone, right? So far, we are at 58 that we've hired. We're working on our next class now. So halfway through the year, I think we're in pretty good shape to meet that ambitious goal.
And having those numbers, it's important to keep the city safe?
Absolutely. Getting those numbers, our number one priority is to get those officers out in the street, not for incarceration, not for arrest, but for the visibility, to discourage any criminal activity that may want to take place.
I think we have a statement right now. Someone else from the audience, Melanie Talia with the Police and Justice Foundation. And you guys work very, very closely with NOPD in recruitment. What's the latest stuff that you're doing these days?
Well, Marcia, you know, when the Police Foundation was established in 1995, we were rooted in the belief that the community needed to unite to provide NOPD the tools necessary to put public safety first. And that continues to hold true today. And that's what we're doing, is we're providing supplemental resources to the police department. And one of those supplemental resources is a recruitment campaign. So together, the Police Foundation and the New Orleans Police Department have launched a cutting-edge NOPD recruitment campaign. We are attracting top talent not only from within our own community, but from around the world. We've already hired 600 police officers. And as Chief Ferguson just said, our goal this year, we're going to hire 120. And we look forward to continuing to work with Chief Ferguson and the department to rebuild the department's manpower and to make New Orleans a safer place to live, to work, and to visit. And I'll add to that, to our audience here and to our viewers at home, if you're watching, if you have a valid driver's license, if you have a high school diploma or a GED, if you're at least 20 years of age, as soon as this show wraps up, go to your computer and visit joinnopd.org. Recruit pay starts at $40,000. Officer pay is almost $50,000. After a year on the job, it's beyond $56,000. We're hiring right now, as the chief just said. We're going to have 4 classes this year. There's one in September and there's one in December. So go do that today. And if you want to learn about the Police Foundation, nopjf.org.
Melanie, let me ask you really quickly, too, in this recruitment effort, what kind of response are you guys getting? Is it mostly from this region, or do you get response from nationwide?
Marcia, not only from the region, but across the country. I think the chief could tell us better, but I think the last class is about 2/3 from the greater New Orleans or the Gulf Coast area. Another 1/3 represents 14 other states across the United States. But in the last few years, I believe we have as many as 10 countries outside of the United States represented in the New Orleans Police Department, including France, Switzerland, and Laos.
Interesting, definitely interesting. So, Chief, how are we doing with our crime rate? I mean, we see that homicide rate is down. It's the
Yes.
lowest rate that it's been, since the 70s or so. We're going to be talking about juvenile crime in just a second, but just overall, how we're looking.
So overall, violent crime is down overall together. I mean, as you said before, homicides, we're down 40%, something to that effect. Armed robbery, we are down 32%, which is, and this is our 4th consecutive year to be down in double digits in armed robbery. So that's something that we're very proud of. Unfortunately, on the opposite side of things is the property crimes. Auto burglaries up 97, 98%. Auto thefts is about 4 or 5%, and that has been our biggest issue, and that we've been trying to deal with over the last several months.
And should people be locking their cars more? I mean, are you finding that? Are you guys?
Yes, people should be, absolutely, they should be locking their cars. Not just target harden themselves by securing anything that is in plain view, out of plain view. That's the biggest thing. Once they see something, they're going into it.
Let me ask you this also. We heard in the previous hour about the consent decree, and so much progress has been made. There's still some things to do. What kind of response are you getting from the community when your men and women are out there policing, interacting with the community? What are they finding?
So I have been visiting roll calls, various bureau meetings, and letting everyone know the feedback that I've been getting from business leaders to the community alike. They're very happy with the services that we're providing. Of course, everyone, especially ourselves, we expect to do more. We want to do more, but what it is that we're doing now, they're very satisfied with that, and that lifts the morale of the men and women and motivate them to do more in themselves to make sure that they're providing the right service.
But as we just touched on, there is certainly concern in the city right now about the what's perceived to be a rising juvenile crime, and particularly with the auto break-ins, to the point where the judges at juvenile court made a policy change in terms of how they're dealing with juveniles who they feel perhaps could present a public risk, where they will be detained until a judge does see them. Aaron, you work very closely with the youth in our community. What's your biggest concern here?
My biggest concern is that we devote time and resources to policies that don't work and that are actually counterproductive, such as relying on incarceration or pretrial detention, needlessly so. Because what we know is when we incarcerate a young person, we're actually increasing the chances that they will commit a crime in the future. And so I think it's important to what your show has done previously. It demonstrated that juvenile crime is actually down this year. As the chief just said, overall crime is down. That includes juvenile crime. And so we need to focus in on the problem and solve that problem. So as car burglaries go up, we need to tailor responses to that problem and not, pull off the shelf some of these older counterproductive policies that don't improve public safety, that use our scarce officer resources, and in some cases will actually increase the chances of crime occurring.
I would have to disagree. The issue at hand is, okay, there are kids that are out there, and I won't say that it's every kid. There are certain pockets. Just last week we arrested 5 individuals, 2 adults and 3 juveniles, for a rash of auto burglaries, as well as a quadruple shooting, as well as several carjackings. One individual was responsible for as many as 80 auto burglaries. Another individual was responsible for as many as 60. So I think we have to, I'm not saying rely specifically on incarceration, but at some point in time, they have to be held accountable for their actions. And that is where we are. I mean, we definitely need to focus on how can we help them on the front end, that is for sure. But until then, we may be considered as the first line of defense or the only line of defense, but in essence, we are the last line of defense. And at this moment, once they get to us, this is what we have to do, unfortunately.
I think one of the challenges we have is sometimes we're saying 2 different things. We know that there are always young people who have challenges, who have had family challenges, and who present in ways that either are violent or could be violent. I don't believe anyone is challenging the opportunity for us to invest in them. What we often don't do is actually invest in them. So we've heard in the show that ran before this, and even in our conversation, we kind of say it, right? We go, well, we know we need to do X, but until then, we never do X. We never actually get to the investment in young people Someone famous once said, the budget is a reflection of your morals. The city budget should be reflective, as early as this year, of investments in young people and the people that serve them in a substantive way. We spend nearly $300 million a year on law enforcement. And as the chief said earlier, law enforcement alone is not the whole of public safety. Public safety actually includes a bunch of the other things that we've been talking about. And that's a real opportunity for us to get beyond this loggerheads and the sort of disagreements we have. And I do think it's fair to say that in some of these cases, we do sweep in other young people who are not violent, who might just be doing innocent things. There's a history of that, and there's a reflex, Chief, that doesn't mean we're saying people are bad, but we're looking at data, and it's hard for us to say, well, it happened the last 20 years, maybe it won't happen this time. I think there's some way for us to come together and create some solutions that are mutual.
So what do you think about that, Chief? I mean, I'm listening to what you're saying, is that you guys are out there in the streets and you're rearresting some of these young people over and over and over again. Understanding what you're saying is that these, we have children out there, we don't want to stymie their growth or expose them to something that would really be negative to them in incarcerating them. So where do we come to the middle? I mean, it seems that the mayor came out with a plan to deal with juvenile crime and saying we're going to reimpose curfew. And how is that going, by the way? And have you guys started that?
Yes, we have. We started that on June 3rd. Since then, I mean, prior to the curfew, we were averaging approximately 180 auto burglaries a week. Last week alone, we had 124. So it was a reduction. And right now, in the middle of this week, we're still on the verge of a second week of reduction in auto burglaries. I think the call has been out for the parents to be more accountable. We can sit here as city leaders, nonprofit organizations, community activists, and we can say that we want to do, or we can do, or we should do all that we are doing, but we also we're leaving out the most important piece to that puzzle, which is parenting.
Parents. Right, yes. Parents have to be involved with their kids.
Absolutely.
And it can't always be easy, particularly with teenagers.
Yes.
It's difficult to keep track of them, but it is very important for the adults in the children's lives to be involved and to keep tabs. And it's also in terms of public health, like we started this conversation.
And again, it's an upstream investment. Certainly don't want to advocate taking any money out of your budget, Chief, but for a fraction of that, invested in early education efforts, as the city has gone towards, or supporting families so that they can be there for their children. Most parents want to be there for their children, but they face so many challenges that we might not understand unless we're on the street seeing them. So how do we invest in that? And then, we don't need to be having this conversation about what happens at the end of it, right?
And I'm going to go to the audience right now. Mr. Ernest Johnson, who is the director of Ubuntu Village, and I think he has a specific question for the chief.
Yes, I do. I would like to dismiss the myth that parents don't care and that they don't want to be accountable. Parents do want to be accountable, but as you just stated, they're faced with a lot of challenges. So my question to the chief is, for the last 10 years, the youth that come in contact with the police department or arrested is 95 to 100% black. What is the root causes, and what is your department doing to reduce the racial disparities?
Okay, thank you.
So I will say this: 95 to 100%. That is a large number, but nevertheless, I can say as a father of 3 African American young men, ages 17 to 24. That is not. I am very conscious, and they are very conscious of that. We not of this, but they are very conscious of potentially being a part of a racial disparity. So as such, I can tell you as the leader of this department, I speak to my officers as a father, as a citizen of New Orleans, to make sure that we are doing the right thing by bias-free policing. Unfortunately, yes, majority of our arrests have led to the incarceration or the arrest of African American men, but we're mainly following through my directives our investigation, where our investigation leads us. We follow the leads that are given to us at that time, or what the complaints may state at that time. But there's no specific instructions given that are specifically targeting any particular race, creed, or color.
Aaron, your concerns?
Yeah, my concern is just that we've had this problem, you know, that Mr. Johnson has identified for so long, and no strategies of how to address it. It's again one of these laments without any strategy. And so I think we need to look at, you know, how can we stand by a system that is so disproportionately targeting our black children. And I think what's important to remember is that 3 out of every 4 arrests are for a non-violent, non-gun crime. And so those are the types of criminal activity, you know, possession of marijuana or a theft or a school fight that happen across demographics and across class, and yet only our black children are coming into the system for it. And so we know how to handle these problems when they're happening with white children, and so we really have to ask ourselves, why aren't we applying those same solutions?
Flozell?
Well, and I also want to add to this, and I think it's important for this entire community. We started this discussion talking about everyone coming together for this. The community's response to our young people has to be interrogated also.
Yes.
Someone is calling the police often, right? So those of us who deal with public safety concerns writ large and policy work, the reason we entered into this discussion was to say, how can we all come together and make sure that we're doing our part? Community really wants to come together and figure out how can we make sure we're only involving police when they have to be involved, which is another side of this conversation that we should be talking about as well.
I agree, if I may say, and that is something that has been a pet peeve of mine as a patrolman. It bothers me that a school would call the police for a fight between kids. That is something administrative that the school should handle. That is not anything
we grew up in this
police should not be involved in that.
That's another opportunity. We've got programs now for trauma-informed work in schools that we're getting ready to expand to multiple school systems, which is understanding that a violent incident that happens in school is more than likely, almost exclusively, the cumulative effect of repetitive exposure to trauma that child is facing and has no mechanism or understanding but to outburst. And so helping teachers and educators and school administrators understand that the response to that is generally very different than just picking up the phone and calling the police, and can actually improve outcomes for the child and the school and the family as a whole. That's something that we are making an investment in, but we need to expand that on all fronts, not just in the school system, but in any institution that touches a child.
Absolutely.
And you know, we have actually some folks from the school system, from the Orleans Public School System, who I think can explain to us some of the things that they are doing to work with the rest of you guys to do the best for our kids. First, we go to Angela Wiggins.
Yes. Through the Office of Child Welfare and Attendance with Orleans Parish School Board, we manage several programs that are geared at working with our kids to provide the very things that you all have spoken about. We manage the citywide truancy center. Our truancy center is not a punitive environment. It is a place where it's a safe haven. Families, schools can get the support they need to quickly reconnect our kids to school. We have the Youth Opportunity Center, which was created and designed by the district to be a safe haven for those kids who are at risk of dropping out, disengaging from school. We do know that school attendance is a direct correlation to delinquency, so it's our plight to make sure that we do what we need to do to keep our kids in school. And we also have partnered with the city to provide case management services to the pay youth, and that's those kids who are eligible for services. Every kid that comes in contact with NOPD does not require services, and we acknowledge that. Some kids might just need a soft touch. Those kids that need more, we have social workers, a team of social workers, who's there to provide those services and wrap around.
And then your colleague, Ulysses Collins.
Yeah, Ulysses Collins, Safety and External Affairs. I totally agree that sometimes schools do call the police, sometimes parents call the police. But what I can say, when the police are called, Chief Ferguson and I, who have a great relationship, remain in constant contact along with the district commanders and the school resource officers to handle those situations accordingly so that they don't result in arrest rather than those kids stay in school. And it's, I think Chief Ferguson alluded to it earlier, that it's a collaborative approach. I have worked with multiple individuals that sit at that table on multiple endeavors surrounding schools where the police may not want to get involved and they want us to handle it and intervene so that it doesn't result in arrest. So we all work together to ensure students remain in school.
All right, thanks to the both of you guys. So you can hear, what is going on in our schools. How more can everybody cooperate about this? What would you say? What more can be done?
Again, I think we need to understand what the true needs are. We need to continue to collaborate to bring everybody to the table. We have great partnerships in the city with the new Office of Youth and Families, but it's bringing the school system to talk to advocates, to talk to service providers, to talk to mental health providers. That's, again, we've talked about working in silos. That's happened for a long time. Once we all can get in the same room, we can maximize our limited resources.
Yes. And I would add, there's great work being done now, both with community as well as elected and appointed officials around amnesty programs for people who owe fines and fees. One of the undercover things we talk about and why this money and justice issue is so important is because there are people who owe thousands of dollars for nonviolent crimes. It subjects them and their families and their children to further incarceration or other endangerment. They can't get jobs. They can't get licenses or licensure. Economic opportunity is a big deal for the families, especially for young people. And their parents and their caregivers, those kind of initiatives could really move us towards, something positive.
And there has been some court action on fines and fees in New Orleans criminal court, right?
There absolutely has been. And I think, to be fair, we're part of a New Orleans Alliance for Equity and Justice looking at the full eradication of money, bail, and fines and fees because it has no place in public safety. It only punishes poor people. And the part of the reason that's so important is because it's not just lawsuits, which are important in some cases when we're dealing with justice issues. But it is also important for us to make quality decisions and for us to make decisions about what we can do. You heard the Chief Justice of the CDC's Chief Judge of Criminal District Court, Kiva Landrum Johnson, say money bail really has no place. Commissioner Stevens said it. Sometimes we don't get to see how that impacts people and their families. These young people that we're worried about, often their families are being the ones caught up in the dragnet of money injustice and financial injustice that is unnecessary. We've made some progress, but we have a long way to go.
Okay, and go ahead, did you want to
just add to that? I think it's important we move beyond the rhetoric of a lot of this, and to the point many of you have made, follow the data. These are situations happening not just here in New Orleans or in Louisiana, but across the world. We have experiments and data to look at and say what's working and how do we apply it? How do we apply the expertise of law enforcement and the health community and others? And the other thing I'll add, Flozell made this point as well, it's sometimes more than just criminal justice issues that matter. Access to jobs, pathways of opportunity, occupational licensure. We have one of the most burdensome licensure regimes in Louisiana in the country. Those are just barriers, in many cases, to a first job, to the point of juvenile justice, certainly to a better job after that. We've got to address this holistically, follow the data, and really understand what works.
And one thing that is also a very key part is the health of children. And Phyllis Landrew is here, and she is with the organization HEAL, and that's really a focus of your group.
Thank you very much. And I really feel like I have the solution to all the discussions that have gone on tonight, because the basis of the problems, the poverty and the social problems and the crime in New Orleans and in Louisiana, as a matter of fact, we are the lowest educated state in the country, and we also have the worst child health status in the country. And that reflects on the fact that our students in school have physical and mental health issues that prevent them from learning and succeeding in school and consequently dropping out. We have hundreds of students in New Orleans, for instance, who cannot get an education and will not get an education. And you may have heard a few minutes ago, you need a high school or a GED a certificate to become a policeman, and you need a job to become a productive citizen in the United States and in New Orleans. And if you cannot succeed in school and you drop out, where do you go? To the streets. And what we're listening to tonight is a result of all of that. What our organization advocates is making sure that the children in our schools have their health conditions evaluated, their health problems identified, their health problems treated and cured and solved so that they can become productive citizens. We have worked in 40 schools now, and we have 40,000 kids who have come through our system. We did a scientific evaluation to find out that not only did the students do better, but overall the school did better. The grade point averages in all of the students had risen to such a level that it raised up the evaluation of the whole school. This is something that we are working on to implement in the state. We're talking to the Orleans Parish School Board. We're negotiating with them to implement our program in some of their schools. And I promise you, this is a simple, humane, and moral approach to solving our problems. All we have to do is make a commitment to do it. Get over our apathy about accepting the fact that 40% of our population can't get an education and won't get an education, and that they have no other alternative but poverty and other means that they use to succeed in life. So I ask you to please support HEAL. Please support our program to make sure that our children, it's called the whole child approach to education. And most of the other states in this country use that approach. We're just having to work really hard to get people here in Louisiana to pay attention, to implement it, to work with us. Tell your school board members and your parents here in New Orleans to support it, and we can change the direction that New Orleans and Louisiana are going. Thank you.
So,
if I could just sort of
thank you, Phyllis.
Add on to that, when you look at what gives you the biggest bang for your buck in terms of long-term health outcomes of an individual or community, early childhood education, investment in those programs are far and away give you your biggest return in terms of life outcomes, in terms of health outcomes. It's really a no-brainer.
And go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I think it's important that the young people we see showing up in the juvenile justice system are not bad kids. That's not who we see. We often see incredibly vulnerable children that, frankly, we still struggle to meet their needs. They're children who the school district is struggling to support and get them the education that they deserve. They're children that have been exposed to incredible amounts of trauma, and they're not getting the trauma-informed services that they need. And so, as Mr. Daniel said earlier, it's time for us to really make that leap and commit to those hard, complex solutions for this. Otherwise, we're never really going to get to the bottom of this.
And Flozell?
Well, I just want to agree with everything that's been said. And we have done, it's really important for us to follow this community's history. We have a history of racial inequity that is so deep and backbreaking. It is not a complaint. It's not just a thing that people say. The data tells us that the generational wealth that was built or not built in communities, black versus white, is a direct line to why we have so many of the challenges that we have. And so this earlier discussion about a generational opportunity, it is not just to educate our kids, it is not just to get them health care, it is also to make sure their parents have high quality jobs and access to business contracts. It is to make sure that people have access to democracy and can really make sure the decisions that are being made with their money, tax money, are actually being invested in the things that will preserve culture in this community, uplift families financially and socially. And we often lose that in the context of this discussion, and we say, oh, the kids are bad. Even though, Jeff is telling us that actually they're only 1.5% of the arrest. So we've got some conflicts here that we need to work together. What I am motivated by is that there are a number of folks who really feel like they want to come together. I also want to take the chance to double down on Commissioner Stevens' point about money bail. If we can end money bail, we can reduce the number of people incarcerated between 300 and 600 people. Those are resources that could go back into investing in communities in really positive ways and keep us focused on real public safety
And
issues.
I asked you before, do you think that'll ever happen here? I mean, we have reduced incarceration rates.
Listen,
greatly. Who would have thought we would have done it to the extent that we have?
And in part because we have so many real challenges, it's been pointed out. But 10 years ago, when we started this conversation, we were told we couldn't do any of this. Each one of us were told, your police department will never get better, you'll never be able to serve children in the justice system, we'll never have a discussion about a public health approach, you'll never be able to reduce the size of the jail and keep violence down. All of those things were untrue. We actually have the data, we have the energy, we have the talent, we have the creativity, and we have the resources, if we deploy them properly, to get this done. It's just the beginning of what we can get done.
Just the beginning, and we saw in the previous hour what has been accomplished over these past 14 years. There's still, since Katrina, there still is a lot that needs to be done, and we've certainly heard tonight the discussion about how we really need to help our kids and how that can help keep our streets safe, and plus give them a good future. So I'm going to ask you guys now to wrap up this discussion. You have 30 seconds each now. What are your priorities? What do you think is the real priority while we're seeking safety and justice in the years to come? I'm going to start with you, Chief.
The biggest thing is taking this holistic approach. Our priority is to work with others. We rather put the horse in front of the cart. We rather that the issue be addressed from the front end with education, and not let us be that sole factor to make that deciding decision. Hey, we're going to have to put this individual in this box because we are now the law enforcement agency that we have no other obligation or responsibility but that incarceration factor. So we want to join and be a part of that holistic approach and whatever it is that we can do to make a difference ahead of it, before the violence, before the crime, before the mindset is there.
Daniel.
Look, we have to really focus on removing barriers to opportunity and pathways to jobs. The dignity of a job means so much to the future of these kids, the men and women who are returning back to society. That's what's going to define the next step for them, is can we provide them pathways to opportunity and open those doors. So we need to really focus on removing barriers, and we just have to continue to follow the data. Set aside the emotion and rhetoric, and there's a lot in this, and it's real. We have to follow the data.
Okay, Aaron.
Yes, we need to focus our resources on what works to make us safer and help children thrive. And so what that means is investing in children as a way of investing in public safety. And then when children do make mistakes, we need to react in ways that actually work to change their behavior. And so often what that means is providing immediate consequences and responses that respond to the root causes of where that behavior comes from. That means investing in alternatives to detention. And if we don't do that, we then don't get to just use detention as the solution.
All right, Dr. Avengo.
So I think we also need to focus on the ground efforts in community to work in prevention with those that are at risk, either individuals or communities of violent injury, and intervention with high yield programs and opportunities that truly meet residents where they are and provide respectful and meaningful and lasting opportunities for them beyond a job here or there.
Flozell.
We have to end money injustice by eliminating bail fines and fees so we can take away that negative incentive. And we have to build justice opportunities by investing in families, by investing in jobs, by investing in the things that communities say they need.
Great ideas discussed tonight, a big task ahead, and I know you guys are all up for it, and the community is too. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thanks to everybody in the audience. Thank you all at home. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Reshaping a Greater New Orleans, Seeking Safety and Justice, made possible by Baptist Community Ministries.